Hi, everybody. Hope you guys are doing well. Sorry we couldn't meet up today, but given the weather, it's probably safer that we're just doing a remote lesson today. And this is a very short lesson. When I dive into Luke next week, I want to, give it enough time to capture how important that is. So this is just a little bit of a intermediary discussion, kind of following on what we talked about a couple weeks ago in class. What I wanted to focus on, since we're sort of halfway through the Gospels, is how they all interact with each other. And the next page touches on it in a little bit more depth, but just from a concept. And I saw this analogy in a couple places. From a conceptual point of view, it's like there is a car accident at a four-way intersection, and these four men all saw the same accident, but they saw it from different viewpoints. And that's why there's, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are written in four different perspectives, right? Uh, and it's important to note, not only are they viewing it from sort of different angles, different perspectives, but their own backgrounds are very different, right? And we talked about this before, how Matthew was, Jewish and a tax collector, which was sort of not a well-respected sort of occupation at the time. So, but the fact that he was very knowledgeable in the Jewish Old Testament makes it a very nice segue to start the New Testament with this with Matthew's gospel, so he can explain all the prophecies in the that were written in the Old Testament and how they're applying to this new person, Jesus, right? And then Mark, and we'll talk a little bit about Mark on the next page, but was very short, right? A very short eyewitness account, almost like this happened, then this happened, then this happened. And Mark was good friends with Peter, who was in jail, and a lot of the scholars believe that Mark was kind of writing Peter's account of what was going on at the time. And he was writing more for the Romans and Greeks of the era. And then Luke, which we'll get into more, and I know we haven't talked too much about Luke, but Luke was a doctor, right? A Greek educated doctor who apparently did a lot of research, right? A lot of interviews with people, eyewitnesses. He was good friends with Paul, who's St. Paul, who we will talk about, I'm sure, at some point. Um, but Luke also wrote Acts, and there's a lot of discussion in Luke about his travels with Paul in Acts, but you can tell that part of his gospel is really written with the helping hand of Paul. And then lastly, John, who in this car crash analogy, you can kind of think about as somebody who came in later. And it wasn't about this happened and this happened, this happened. It was more about what was important, right? What should we focus on, and what are the lessons learned, and really what happened after this accident, right? That was his focus, and he sort of had the benefit, right? Because Mark, Matthew, and Luke had covered sort of the details. So that's how, one different way of looking at the relationship between the four men who wrote these gospels. Now, this is a page that I don't know. I'm kind of fascinated by this graph, but we talked about this a little bit 2 weeks ago in class, but I thought it made sense to look at it a little deeper. So this is a relationship of what's written in the Gospels of Mark, Matthew, and Luke. And we talked before, Mark was written first, or at least that's what the scholars believed. But they were written very close, right? Matthew, Mark, and Luke from a timing perspective. But they do believe Mark's was written first. And you can see they're called the synoptic Gospels, which means they're seen together. So think again about the car crash and the three eyewitnesses. They all saw the same thing, just from different perspectives. But to me, the key thing that's interesting here is the little brown box in the middle of Mark. So everything Mark wrote was sort of, in essence, overlapped by Luke and Matthew, right? That there's very small part of what Mark wrote that wasn't further expanded upon in Luke and Matthew. But in Luke and Matthew, they had some very different sections of their gospel that weren't covered elsewhere. So that's in the bottom left-hand corner, you can see 35% of Luke, which we'll get to, wasn't in Mark or in Matthew. And in Matthew, 20% of what he wrote wasn't either in Mark or Luke. So they took what Mark did, and maybe they were a couple of years later, and really expanded on it and added their thing. So I think from Matthew's perspective, what we know is he probably added some things that would have been very important to his audience, which were the Jewish people who understood and had studied the Old Testament. So things that were further expanding on some of the Old Testament prophecies. And Luke, because he had interviewed all of these people, all the eyewitnesses, it was less about sort of the apostles with Luke, but more just other people who were around, because he's sort of this Greek scientist going through this very scientific method almost of investigating. And so that's where he's got, a third of his gospel is going to be new that we haven't talked about previously in Mark and Matthew. And again, his audience was mainly, non-Jewish people. So it's a lot of, here's what happened, but here's why it's important to you. And that's why there's so much uniqueness to Luke's gospel. And then what's not on this page is John's gospel. And again, we talked about, John probably, they think maybe was 10 years later after Luke and Matthew. And so, the details of what actually happened were already written down. So he didn't have to go through and redo that. What he focused on is what's really important, the bigger picture of Christianity. And again, we'll dive into that, later in the year when we go into John. But I just wanted to give you an idea of how they're related together, how they fit in together, and the fact that because they were contemporaneous, right? They were written roughly the same period of time, Mark, Luke, and Matthew. There is a lot of overlap, but even then, there's still a lot of uniqueness, and that's what we're going to focus on in the coming weeks with Luke. So with that, hopefully you guys have a safe weekend and week. Hopefully school doesn't close too much, and then next week will be remote again for us, and then in 2 weeks, hopefully we will see you in class. So take care, enjoy the Super Bowl if that's your thing, and we'll talk to you soon. Take care.